Hi, I'm Linda Losito, and I'm a coleopterist. I've been collecting and identifying beetles for most of my life. It's only in the last few years that I've come to realise the greatly overlooked potential of detritus in surveying for beetles. The more I look, the more kinds of useful detritus I find. And obviously your first question is going to be, what do I mean by detritus? Well, basically anything that's considered to be dead. This includes stuff which builds up passively, like the frass or dust in hollow trees, debris which builds up in roof gutters and disused chimneys, underneath stands of ivy, or on windowsills and in empty nests. Then there is the more actively produced matter in bird pellets and animal scat. What do I mean by data? Well, as I'm a coleopterist, I'm interested in fragments of dead beetles, which can be extracted from the detritus and then identified as species. If the pieces are in scat or pellets, I soak the material in detergent and disinfectant first, before separating out the individual fragments from the collected debris under a microscope. Some of the fragments I work with can be as small as 1 millimetre, but they have made a huge contribution to the data I've been able to add to iRecord. Many of the entomologists that I know are disinclined to gather data in this way because it's just too time-consuming and tedious. Identification is much easier if you start off with a complete insect. Keys always assume that the insects in front of you have a full complement of leg and antennal segments, which can be assessed, counted and measured. Complete specimens do turn up from time to time in frass, but fragmented specimens are much more common. If all you've got is a single elytron or partial elytron, then you need a fair idea of what it would have looked like when it was complete, to grasp what you're seeing. If the specimen is old and discoloured with rubbed scales and pubescence, identification is even harder. You have to mentally put the lost bits back in place, and then physically compare it to the whole specimen. A good collection of your own, or a museum collection, is essential. Online photographs will not do. Once you have a named fragment collection of your own, it all gets much easier. And once the species start to repeat, processing can be really fast. But why would you bother when there are so many other ways to sample insects? Vein traps, malaise traps, pitfall traps, light traps, and the rest all have their place, and I've used all of them. But each method has its problems. The first problem is that you may need permission to collect. Many landowners are unhappy with traps being set up on their land. There have to be permits and paperwork before anything can happen. Then you have to source the equipment and set it up in exactly the right place and hope that it will be there when you return for the samples. If what you're taking is a handful of pellets, building up on the pavement beneath a rookery, or a handful of frass from a fallen tree in a graveyard, people are unlikely to object, although you often get strange looks. There is also the problem of numbers. Traps which are baited or use attractants can generate large samples, not all of the target species. It takes a lot of time, often unpaid time, to process all of the resulting specimens, which have to be individually checked. There is often a lot of collateral damage. Members of the public who have grasped that insect populations have declined dramatically are rightly concerned when we hear of us killing insects. In detritus samples, there are unlikely to be more than a few examples of each species, and they are already dead. Another point to consider is where the insects collected in the trap are coming from. With insect samples from plant frass, you're looking at what is naturally there, not something that has been pulled in by artificial bait or UV light, so you get a more accurate insight into their lifestyle. In dead wood frass, many of the finds are bark beetles, borers and tunnelers, which have been directly feeding on the tree. You could go looking for the live beetles rather than waiting for them to die, but then you have to break apart a lot of valuable old wood, destroying many developing larvae in the process. Gathering a handful of loose frass causes much less disruption. To find a live specimen of a particular species, you have to look at the right time and in the right place. With detritus, it waits there until you come looking for it. A dead specimen can persist for a long time in good condition. An exoskeleton is pretty tough. The rhinoceros beetle, Synodendron cylindricum, was a good example. I had only ever recorded 3 live rhinos in my life, but in the last year of searching dead wood frass, I've identified the remains of 42 more specimens. They are almost everywhere I have looked, not rare at all. Widespread but very seasonal. I could not have found that out any other way. Some beetles don't move around very much because they're flightless or like to stay hidden. I've only ever found one live pill beetle, Verus pilula, but birds and hedgehogs know where to poke about and find them, so I have recorded many of their heads and elytra in hedgehog droppings and bird pellets. In a current survey of Blenheim High Park, despite 4 years of trapping by several coleopterists, the only records of them have come from my tree frass surveys. I suspect the pill beetles may be from degraded bird pellets dropped into the tree, but they could have simply climbed in and died. The point is that normal trapping methods had so far not revealed their presence. Hedgehog droppings are another good source of beetle records, and they also give an insight into the other things that hedgehogs eat. I've broken down several hundred of them, and I've noticed a considerable difference between the diet of truly wild hedgehogs and the suburban ones who get a lot of supplementary feeding. Hedgehogs naturally eat invertebrates like beetles. So far I have identified 34 beetle species from hedgehog droppings, and this formed the basis of this display I created for a recent Amateur Entomologist Society exhibition, showing an archived specimen of each beetle alongside the fragments I identified it from. Many suburban droppings were just an anemic mush of undigested peanuts with no visible beetle remains. I worry that this fast food diet is not healthy for hedgehogs, and some recent research supports my concern. You're probably familiar with barn owl pellets and their analysis as a means of shedding light on local mammal populations. But in fact, most birds regurgitate indigestible matter in the form of pellets, and all of these can give insight into the bird's diet, some of it of major importance. One of my heroes, Miss Hibbert Ware, carried out an analysis of the little owl diet in the 1930s. At the time, little owls were believed to be major predators of game bird chicks. By analysing their pellets, she proved that the birds survived largely on insects and were innocent of the charge of game bird predation. As a direct consequence, the government of the day decided to cancel their planned extermination programme, so she saved a whole species. My own analysis of 40 little owl pellets from farmland in Gloucestershire in 2017 produced a list of 48 beetle species, plus the jaws of voles, shrews and mice, as well as various bits of plastic. But definitely no game bird chicks. Most bird pellets are small and difficult to find, but rook pellets can be found in larger numbers below their communal tree roosts. The beetle content is difficult to analyse because it is ground up into very tiny pieces by the stones in the crop. However, my analysis of pellets from rook roosts around Stromness in Orkney has generated 42 species and added several new records to the Orkney list. Raven and carrion crow pellets, on the other hand, are comparatively large and solid, and on Lundy Island they are relatively easy to find because they're often dropped on and around the dry stone walls which protect them from damage. My analysis of 40 pellets, collected over 3 days in 2017, produced a list of 38 beetle species and 281 new records. I was in fact expressly forbidden to trap and collect any live beetles as a condition of the permit I was given, because Lundy is a triple SI. I could have tried photographing live specimens, but this is a very time-consuming and inadequate technique, and you first have to locate all the beetles in 3 days. Analysis of dead material was the best way to proceed. The corvids had access to areas of this rocky island inaccessible to researchers, Their pellets provided a far better range of species than I could have achieved using conventional traps. Pellet and scat analysis have shown quite clearly that dung beetles are a major source of food for both birds and animals. One of the first pellets I collected was in 2016. It was a very large, impressive corvid pellet, almost certainly from a raven, and contained the heads of 71 dung beetles, mostly Aphodius rufus. Then in 2019 I collected a badger dropping along the Oxford Canal, which contained the remains of 26 of the larger dung beetle, Detritus spinager. In the absence of any other farm animals in the surrounding fields, these beetles must have come from the cattle and horse dung on Port Meadow, which was some distance from where the badger decided to drop his own dung. He also had to cross railway tracks. Clearly, the badger will go a long way for a good meal of dung beetles. This emphasises the importance of these insects to the whole ecosystem. For the widespread use of the dewormer ivermectin in livestock is making their dung uninhabitable, causing a drastic decline in these beetles and all the other life that depends on them. So as with the hedgehog droppings, this type of analysis does not just provide records, it can reveal otherwise unnoticed ecological interactions. It has even given me new insight into my own home environment. I live in a semi-detached house in a 1930s estate in the suburbs of Oxford. I've been collecting beetles here for 50 years using mostly traditional methods where I caught and killed live insects. I had identified a total of 318 species from 48 families. I didn't think I was going to get any more. Then about a year ago, I started considering the pockets of debris lying about in the garden and around the house. So far, this has added another 45 species, raising my total to 363. One bucket of brick dust and debris from an unblocked chimney yielded 50 species, including 2 additions to the house list, Alphatobius diaperinus and Casonus parallelepipedus. This formed the basis of another display, this time for the British Entomological and Natural History Society. Gleanings from the roof gutter containing the surprising find of the tenebrionid beetle, Cortesias bicolor. The gutter debris also proves that our roof is subjected to the constant rain of dung beetles. My guess is that these arrive in the pellets of jackdaws who forage in the surrounding countryside before returning to the suburbs to roost. The front walls of our house are covered with ivy. It was only recently that I realised that it harbours thriving populations of 5 tiny ladybird species from the genera Skimnus, Nephus, and Rhizobius. I might never have known if I hadn't investigated the frass below. And just last week, a sweeping of frass from under the ivy unexpectedly gave me Donaceus simplex and Eudemera nobilis, both new to the house list. The only equipment needed was a dustpan and brush, and a decent microscope, and lots of practice.